Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open the pages of history to look at a genuinely remarkable and honestly deeply misunderstood figure, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, or as he was affectionately known to his people, Baka Khan. We're going to unpack his incredible autobiography, My Life and Struggle, and we're doing this chapter by chapter to exhume the truth of who this man really was. Set against the incredibly vibrant, colorful landscape of his Pashtun homeland, we're going to uncover why his message of peace is, arguably, more urgent right now than ever before.
So who exactly was Bacha Khan? Well, first things first, I want you to completely wipe your mind of the modern, often violent stereotypes that are usually associated with the rugged Pashtun tribal belt. Seriously, just toss them out. I want you to imagine a history that completely defies those expectations. A history where one of the world's greatest armies of non-violent freedom fighters wasn't born in some quiet, secluded monastery, but right there, in a landscape historically defined by fierce warriors and blood feuds. Bacha Khan, who was often called the Frontier Gandhi, was the architect of this absolute game-changer of a reality.
100,000. Let that sink in for a second. That massive number represents the unstoppable army Bacha Khan raised. But here is the wild part. They weren't armed with rifles. No way. These were 100,000 highly disciplined, peaceful Pashtun men who faced down the brutal, overwhelming might of the British Empire without ever firing a single bullet. When they were faced with artillery fire right in the streets, they just stood their ground. They fell for freedom, completely unarmed.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core of his movement. These folks were the Khudai Khidmatgar, which translates to the servants of God. They actually swore sacred oaths to never lift a weapon, and they wore these very distinct uniforms dyed in the deep red clay of their homeland. I mean, this movement was an absolute masterclass in sheer moral courage. They believed and proved that true bravery wasn't found in violence, but in an unwavering, peaceful commitment to justice, even when they were literally staring down the barrel of an imperial gun.
Section 1. Silenced by propaganda.
Now you might be wondering, how does an army of 100,000 peaceful revolutionaries just vanish from our collective memory? Why is it that the global community universally knows and celebrates figures like Nelson Mandela, but has largely forgotten the Frontier Gandhi? Well, he was a man twice silenced by two entirely different political forces. On one side, you had the British colonial masters. They feared him because, look, a violent rebellion, that can be easily crushed with artillery. But an educated, disciplined, non-violent movement, that's unstoppable. Then, on the flip side, after 1947, the early Pakistani political establishment viewed him with deep paranoia because he had opposed the partition of India. He argued it would divide Muslims, so he was labeled a traitor by the state. Now, we aren't taking sides here, we're just impartially looking at the historical reality of how these specific geopolitical fears from both sides led to his erasure.
And the cost of those political fears? It was immense. 37. He spent a staggering 37 years of his life locked inside British and Pakistani prisons. That meant being taken away from his community, away from those vibrant, traditional Pashtun guest houses or hudras, where their culture really thrived. Think about that. That's nearly a decade longer than Nelson Mandela's imprisonment. And his crime? He simply demanded provincial autonomy, democracy, and basic human rights for his people. He traded his own freedom just to serve humanity.
You know, when folks do occasionally hear about Bacha Khan, they kind of tend to think he was just a political shadow of Mahatma Gandhi. But this quote absolutely dismantles that myth. He said, "There is nothing surprising in a Muslim or a Pashtun following the path of nonviolence. It is the path of the Prophet." His commitment to peace wasn't just adopted from outside influences. He was rooted deeply, organically, in his own understanding of Islam, the Holy Quran, and his very own cultural heritage.
Okay, let's dive into this next part. Section 2. Pillars of the movement.
So, Bacha Khan was incredibly perceptive. He looked at his own society, a society that was often torn apart by centuries of blood feuds and really destructive honor codes, and realized something profound. His struggle wasn't just about fighting foreign occupiers. It was fundamentally about internal societal reform. Step 1 of his grassroots movement? Education. He knew that an uneducated nation is an easily manipulated nation. So he literally traveled on foot from village to village to establish Azad, or independent schools, teaching critical thinking, science, and math. And step 2 was women's empowerment. Long before modern social movements, in a deeply patriarchal society, he stood up fiercely for female rights. He opened girls' schools and insisted women be a vital part of the political struggle. He knew a society simply cannot fly if half its wings are clipped.
Section 3. A defiant childhood.
To really understand how this incredible figure was forged, we have to travel back in time to his childhood. Born around 1890 in the village of Utmanzai, his early education started out pretty traditionally. At age 5, he was sent to the local mosque. There, he learned the entire Quran by heart under a mullah who, ironically, was illiterate and didn't actually understand the words he was teaching. But the learning didn't stop there. By age 8, his brave parents made a huge move and sent both him and his older brother, Dr. Khan Saheb, to a modern British school.
Now, during this era, a really stark contrast emerged. It was like a cultural tug-of-war. Local mullahs were spreading some pretty dark propaganda, preaching to the masses that anyone who attended these modern schools was an unbeliever and would be thrown straight into hell. They were claiming parents only sent their kids there for money. But on the flip side, you had Bacha Khan's broad-minded progressive parents. They bravely faced the secret slander of these religious leaders just to make sure their children got a modern education.
And the household he grew up in, it was entirely defined by honor, resistance, and that famous traditional Pashtun hospitality. Just listen to this quote from his father, Khan Baram Khan. "The unknown traveler is also a guest, sent to us by God. Therefore, I must serve him myself." His father was a powerful chieftain, yet there was zero arrogance. He would personally serve food to travelers. That deep love for humanity and that fierce protection of the oppressed, that was literally the air Bacha Khan breathed growing up.
Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 4, Reclaiming Cultural Heritage.
Right, so before Bacha Khan could lead his people forward, he knew he had to guide them in reclaiming something crucial, a cultural heritage that had been systematically erased by invaders, colonial powers, and just plain ignorance. He constantly reminded the Pashtuns of their connection to the ancient Aryan civilization, the peaceful teachings of Buddha, the philosophies of Zoroaster, and the ancient universities that once flourished in their very own land. He needed to prove to them, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that their ancestors were not the backward savages the British claimed they were. No, they were the very cradle of civilization.
And that brings us to his absolute firecracker of a wake-up call. You are not sheep, you are lions. Stop bleating like sheep, roar like lions. He wasn't just giving them a dry history lesson here. He was enthusiastically demanding that they step into their true, powerful identity. He wanted to awaken his people so they could break free from centuries of oppression and destructive internal traditions.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative question. So what does this all mean for us? We've seen how Bacha Khan totally dismantled the myths of his time, using radical love, education, and absolute nonviolence to unite his people against impossible odds. So what should you take away from this? Just look around at our modern world. How can we apply Bacha Khan's incredibly successful blueprint for peace to our own fractured societies today? I really want you to chew on that and keep it in mind as we continue to explore the life of this forgotten prophet of peace. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.